I've known the next presenter all of his life, as a matter of fact, and I've known him since he was a baby, because the next presenter is me. So, and I'm not going to do a big introduction on me because I'm going to do that. But what I wanted to do is have a conversation with you. And this is, yes, this is a presentation in there. I'm just going to see if I can get control of this. Can I take control of this in there? Or do I have to get you to? There's no take control button here, so it's asking me to reload. You're going to have to run it for me, Jason, because I can't reach it. Okay. So I want to have this conversation with you in there, and we're I'm going to be. Oh no, I can't see the slides. So that's my choice. Let me see if I can find the. See if we can come back in. This will be interesting. So can you just put the slides back up, Jason, and see if I can run them? I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the take control button in there. It's just okay. No. Can you keep them for showing me while I'm doing this, or just when there? Okay. So the next slide is building a data-driven culture. I'm going to have to talk you through this then, Jason, because it's not coming in there. And then there's the slide that introduces me. But I'm going to talk about building a data-driven culture with you here. That's sorry, this is really hard without seeing them. But building a data-driven culture is something that has fascinated me. I'll give you a little bit. If you go on the slide that says, the next slide that has a picture of me, you'll see me introducing myself in there. And I work for IT World Canada. I'm a publisher, and we put out itworldcanada.com, a number of websites, a number of podcasts, and all that sort of stuff. But at heart, I'm a guy who's been driven a lot by culture and trying to understand how culture works. And so that's who I am. But what am I talking about? Culture. And if you just go on to the next slide, the culture slide, culture is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. That's Clifford Geertz's definition of it. But culture is really what we believe in there. And so, and this is something I've been grappling with for most of my life here, is that culture is something that is extremely important in what we do. As a matter of fact, if you go to the picture of the book and the album on there, Jason, I wrote a whole book about digital transformation in the first person, which was about how, at the end, I've been a consultant, I've worked in industry, and finally ended up owning a company with somebody else, and a company that was failing, and transformed it digitally in there. And that was where I really first started to get the ideas that populated this. But I'm also an artist, and I have a band. I have an album out. I have several albums out, and things like that. So I brought I like to think that I was trying to balance the creative and the analytical piece in there, and I think this is a start in there, because if you think that way, you start to ask questions. And you can go to this slide, Jason. You can have all the right data and still make the wrong decisions, and that has fascinated me, is how this could occur. How could you have all the right data and and still make the wrong decisions? And I'll give you some examples of that. Just the next slide on Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera, and then it killed it. And this is this article, Why Innovation Often Fails. Kodak actually invented the digital camera. The next example, and if you can move the New Coke slide, New Coke debuted 30 years ago, or more now, but it was an absolute disaster in terms of how something worked. Netflix, Blockbuster could have bought Netflix for $50 million. And now Blockbuster is no more, and the CEO thought it was a joke. And all of these have been fairly carefully researched. I know everybody in these events comes out and says all these things happen. These have been pretty carefully researched. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is BlackBerry. And this is the Wall Street Journal slide there, the inside story of how the iPhone crippled BlackBerry. And that You know, that is a huge piece in there. And so if you go to the next slide, why didn't they see it coming? The subject of my book was, why didn't they see this happening? And if you read, sorry, refer to my book, but if you read the book, you'll understand that there's a whole long time that you've got, and then when transformation hits, you have no time to react. You must see and prepare in advance, and that's really the story of the book, is the damage that gets done when you don't do that. So why didn't they see this? You know, and they had the data, and this is my slide. They had the data. Kodak invented the digital camera and had commissioned a report that warned them of the threat. Coke, absolute marketing power. There is just no doubt about the fact that they knew the power of their brand in there. And why didn't they spot the fact that the formula for their success was their brand and not their trying to copy Pepsi's taste? Blockbuster, I said, had the opportunity to buy Netflix, didn't believe it. And my beloved BlackBerry, in there. Would you go to the next slide? This is all they saw. There's a big gray arrow in there. This is all they saw. This line moving up. And I know I was talking to people at BlackBerry at the time. And, you know, I talked to somebody who said, aren't you afraid of the iPhone? And the guy just practically patted me on the head and said, oh, Jim, our sales are keep going up and up and up. We're going to sell more this term than we did the next. And go to the next slide. You'll see what they should have looked at. And the data existed. This graph doesn't just show the upward line of BlackBerry sales, and yes, you know, they were moving up, but there's a whole thing on that. But look at what's happening to iPhone shipments. You had to see this as a threat if you chose to look at all the data. And you go to the next slide, and you have to believe that it's possible that you could lose. And this slide is that line moving up and that line crashing down for BlackBerry. And this is exactly what I talked about. If you don't take action when you have the time, the downward slide in the digital age is next to impossible to avoid. How do I know it? Well, we rescued a company, and if you go to that slide that says it's until it's too late. We rescued a company that was just on the edge, and we made some of the right decisions at the right time, and some of them were luck, and some of them were data-driven in there. So the question that you have to ask is, and you go to the next slide in there, how can you have all the right data and make the wrong decisions is the key question. If you go to the next slide, Peter Sengay, the author of The Fifth Discipline, and one of the first people who really influenced me, asked the question so much more brutally. He said, how can a team of committed board members with individual IQs above 120 appear to have a collective IQ of 60? And that's the question that you need to solve, because without the ability to use the data, and we've heard this several times today, without the culture that absorbs it and takes it on and says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make different decisions, I'm going to take actions from this data, what is the point? There is no point. And I keep telling this to my staff, there's a new KPI, knowledge that predicts or influences, knowledge you can do things with. I talk about us as a publisher. I say we provide news you can use to make better decisions. Because if you don't do something, knowing something, if you have the data and you don't do anything, the data is worthless. Or, you know, and if you go to the Pogo slide there, Jason, and this is, you know, you're old when your memes are out of date, and your memes come from times when there were no memes. And this is Pogo, a cartoon, but it was a cartoon I grew up with. But they had this famous thing they kept coming back to. We have met the enemy, and he is us. And that's when we talk about culture. We talk about culture as a shared truth. We talk about culture, but culture is made up of individual people who coalesce to a certain way of viewing the world. And those people are flawed. If you go to the next slide, the one with the red numbers on it there, here's the average person. And this is, again, from the science. You can find them. I've given you some ideas. Wikipedia lists 115 plus biases, and they're all that we have. In other words, ways we're biased in our decision making. You know, the 15 logical fallacies. And if anybody's taken a logic course, and if you haven't and you do data, you should. 15 logical fallacies that we fall victim to regularly. 8 archetypal patterns. And those of you, archetypes, what are archetypes? Archetypes are things that happen so many times they're there. That Romeo and Juliet is about romance. That's an archetype. It just happens so much in there. And West Side Story is a Romeo and Juliet. Those are archetypes, and they're patterns of failure in business that are so common and been documented again by Peter Sengay and others. They're so common that you can't escape them in there. And the last piece from Daniel Kahneman, there are 2 different thinking systems. I'll share these slides with you, so I'm not gonna, but some biases. Here's some quick biases that we have in there. The anchoring effect. The anchoring effect, when you see a big number or a number, you automatically anchor in that. If somebody says a car is going to cost you $30,000 and you go, wow, and then they say, well, I'll sell it to you for $25,000, you have an immediate impact. But if they said the car costs $20,000, I'm going to sell it to you for $25,000, how do you raise that number? Your first number you have, everything is oriented around that. As a matter of fact, to make a good impression, I've already done that to you once. And if you realized it in here, and I'm not sleight of hand guy, but I put the 115 at the top of that slide. Why? It's going to have a bigger impact on you than the 2. And so you're going to relate everything to this is a bigger problem in there. And you did it unconsciously. There's the frequency illusion. The frequency illusion is, you ever get that thing where you see something and then you see it all the time? Well, yeah. But it's not that the thing is happening more. It's that once we're aware of something, we trigger to it more in there. There's a famous confirmation bias. We all know about that. And that is, we look to find an answer that we believe and rationalize it. We look to confirm our assumptions. And that is something, it's a bias that activates in people all the time. So, if you present me information that I don't believe, I'm going to go looking for the proof that you're wrong. And that's just how our brains are structured. Loss aversion, a famous one. Why does somebody hold on to a stock after they've lost so much money? Why don't they sell it and put it into something that's going to earn them more money? This happens in investments all the time because we fear loss more than anything. Something we've lost will pay more to prevent a loss than we will to get a gain. Now that twists in corporates. It's not always the same. It has to be a realistic loss that people think they're going to feel, which is why, sometimes we can't warn executives of things because they just don't buy it. They have a confirmation bias. I'm going to escape this. So some biases will work against these, but loss aversion is a big one. Watch for it in there. And then survivorship bias. And survivorship bias is a really big one. And it says, at the end of it, whoever survived, that team that won the playoffs, they had good coaching. So they must have won because of the good coaching. Well, there's a lot of good coaching out there. Was that the reason they really won? But when we see who gets out of something, we take them as the winner. Biases operating all the time. Logical fallacies, spot your way through this. Roses are flowers. Some flowers fade quickly, and therefore, roses fade quickly. How many people think that's true? Immediately, you probably think it's true, and yet it's not. It is false. Roses are flowers. They're not all flowers. Some flowers fade quickly. That doesn't mean roses have to be in that data set. And you watch that fallacy get played out all over the place, and that's just one of many. The archetypes. There's a great thing, if you ever want to check out Peter Sengay on these, there are 8 individual archetypes from, fixes that fail. The classic fixes that fail is so common. And that is, you fix something and it breaks something else. So you keep applying the fix. And the classic one of those, and I'll leave you with these, again, you can see these slides. Take a look at some of these because they happen so often in there. The classic fix is, I'm going to reward you, I hate the word incentivize you, when incenting someone is good enough word, but I'm going to give you an incentive to do something. Now, so I'm going to give you more money to be a more committed, creative employee. That's going to work. Actually, as Dan Pink pointed out, and there's a great video on this, you can see it, where he says this line, there's a huge gap between what science knows and what management does. This is actually false. It's been replicated study after study after study that dollar incentives make you less creative, they make you less able to solve complex problems. They're good for piecework. You know, if I make the same thing over and over again, you can get that. But dollar incentives actually, in every study, show that they don't work. And as a matter of fact, they actually impede a complex work in there. So, and so why do we think that? Well, we're subject to all of these failings. And if you go to the next slide there, you know, and the last wrapping this up, and again, is if you ever want to check out a very good book, think of Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman. And Daniel Kahneman, as I said, is the only non-economist who's ever won the Nobel Prize in economics. And if you can go to that picture of the person with the system 1, system 2 there, Jason. System 1, system 2, he says, not that our brain is mechanically different, but he says it works in 2 systems. And the first system is unconscious, it's fast, it does things quickly. It's like you're being on automatic pilot. If you want a system 1 type of behavior, hey, here you go. I've been driving, and I get to someplace and I've been driving correctly, but I don't know how I got there. That's your system 1 working. But it's also what answers 2 plus 2. You don't even think. That's the system that is there. It's decisive. It makes quick decisions. It acts on impulse. It acts on gut feeling. It has, you know, intuition into it. And then you've got a rational system, system 2. And the rational system actually can do things like it takes effort to work this system, but it's logical. It will deal with problems systematically. It'll think statistically, but that's not how our brain doesn't want to go there. And as a matter of fact, if you give it a problem that it needs system 2 to solve, all of those biases, all of those different problems. If you give yourself something that needs system 2 to solve, it's going to basically kick it back to system 1 if it can. And here's a good example. You know, there's a bat and a ball. Now the ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Hands up if you said 10 cents. That's your system 1 mind. Your system 2 mind would say that doesn't work. Actually, the bat and the ball can't cost that. The bat, if it costs $1 more, then the ball costs 5 cents. And so you end up with not being able, and many of you are sitting there going, no, that can't work. That can't work. And that's your system mind kicking in over and over again that says that it just doesn't work. So what do we do about this? And this is the thing. If culture is the accumulation of our shared belief, and our shared beliefs are held by us and are so fragile or so easily fooled, or in many cases so biased and wrong, how do we become a data-driven culture? And that's, you know, I hope I've articulated the problem well. I'm going to go through some of the solutions, I think. And I'm spending a whole book on them, but I don't, you know, and I don't want to make that an excuse, but I came up with 5 things I'd like to leave you with in there. 1, and make the problem visible. And that's what I've tried to do with you today, is make the problem visible. Now, I'm not suggesting you give a lecture to your colleagues and all that sort of thing or anything like that, but find the opportunities to demonstrate when things are wrong, and when people are jarred, you can reach their system 2 mind. If 2 plus 2 is not going to do it, that your system 1 will answer that. But if you ask somebody how to multiply 253 times 762, they have to make that shift. And that's just a crude example, but breaking someone's assumptions every chance you get, presenting them with data that jars their assumptions, and proving that every opportunity you get to do that, do it. And you can have that conversation about how you need to think about things differently. That's 1. 2, you need to embrace methodical testing and repeatable results. And I keep going home to this: knowledge that predicts or influences, knowledge that allows you to get a result. And go back to your high school science type of thing, which is I'm going to have an experiment. I'm going to try this. I'm going to have a thesis. I'm going to prove it, and I'm going to prove that it happens, and I'm going to show the results. And you need to start breaking things down into that. This jumping to a conclusion that we do so many times, it's obvious. It is the classic example in there. So you need to set up ways that you can do this methodically and start this small. Start people to understand that what we want are repeatable results. And so that if you can do this, then do it. When you find those results, step 3, amplify them with stories. And I'll give you an example in there. You know, we went through an experiment. People told me it was impossible to do something that we were doing. And so we set a benchmark. We said, here's where we are in this. And I worked with my analytics group to, just by working with measuring what we were doing and encouraging by measuring, we found that we could move a number in a way that nobody thought we could, and it had an incredible impact on our bottom line. And then I told that story, not about me, but about the staff member and the people who did it. And I tell that story every chance I get, because stories are important. And then repeat, you know, and let them prove you wrong. And that is going to be the thing that I think will save us. So a couple of things. Here's making the problem visible and seeing this. Here's a good example that I use all the time. This is an airplane that was brought, and this was the shape of a lot of airplanes that came back out of Europe in World War II. And in World War II, they had to figure out how they were going to put armor on an airplane that was going to keep it from getting shot down. So they took a look at the planes when they came back, and that's the picture you see. All those white dots are gunshots in there. And so what do? Where do you put the armor? And I bet you're thinking you put it over the white spots, but that may be wrong. Why? Those are the planes that got back. The ones that didn't come back are the ones that you need to see. Where would the white dots be on those? And okay, we break open, we start to think about that. Then agree on a way to measure the new way we're going to do this, set a benchmark, and then measure your progress against that benchmark. So get people thinking of a new way. Give a good way to jar them into a new way of thinking. Find it in a skunkworks exercise. Find it in a way that you can start to figure out that, you know, I can show you this number works. What can we do? And then make it visual and visible. And visual is important in there. And when people say, you know, let's ask why it happened. Now, let's ask a really good question. Why will what we do cause a change? And you start to shift the way you ask questions. Methodical testing and repeatable results are probably, if you move on to the next slide there, methodical testing and repeatable results. The 5 whys. Don't stop until you get to the root cause. Keep asking why. The other thing that I use a lot is, I don't care it's true. And because truth is where we fall into our logical fallacies. I don't care what's true. I care what works. Don't show me it's true. Show me it works. And the last piece is describing this in the reality we have so many times. And this is how people keep a culture going. They find the one time that something doesn't work and they keep hammering on that. Well, I tried this once and it didn't work in there. And I go back to them and say, I'm not interested in once. I'm interested in, consider it like we're placing a bet. The bet is I can make this happen more times than chance. And that's how I set stuff up. Don't allow yourself to be defeated by that. My friend's cousin tried that and it didn't work in there. Next piece, once you find those things, amplify them with stories. Amplify them with stories is a great book. I won't repeat it in there, but check this book out. These guys, Chip Heath and Dan Heath, took urban legends, the same things that run through social media, and said, here's how you make ideas stick. You make them simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, appeal to emotion, and above all, tell stories. And again, I don't make no money from the sales of their book, but check that out, because if you apply that in corporate storytelling, you will become a much richer person. And then, repeat. not your stories. This is really important. As a person who does data analytics, find a champion and make them the champion. They will tell the story. Tell their stories, not yours. There's always a suspicion of your stories. This took me a long time to learn as a consultant. Find somebody and tell their story. And why? Because you're actually using those ideas of our flawed way of making decisions. What we're familiar with is not easily distinguished from truth. What we hear a lot, we think is true. And so you've got to make sure that you deliver that in those terms. Use the tools of the mind to work your own. Tell somebody's success story so many times it becomes part of the truth. And a repeated behavior that we believe becomes culture. And the last thing I want to leave you with, and I'm sorry, I will try and hang around and ask questions and network, but I'm keeping my own flaw, not answering the questions. But the thing that I've said is prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. And this is the thing. When our employees come to, Edward Deming said it, in God we trust, all others bring data. Don't have to win every argument. As a matter of fact, the arguments you lose can be great. When my staff come to me now and they say, Jim, I've got the data, I'm going to prove that you're wrong. And I go, thank you. Thank you. Why? Because you proved me wrong. I don't have to be right about everything. That's not my job. My job is to help you think better. That's my job. My job is to help you learn to use data to influence and do the right things. And I don't have to be right all the time. And again, the new KPIs, knowledge that predicts or influences, repeatable examples, stories of success, and ways that lead to new ways of thinking about ourselves. And that's what culture is, what we believe and the way we think about ourselves. Changing that's a long process, but you can do it. And you can do it you can be a part of that change. And if I'm wrong, I'd love it. Anybody out there, link up with me on LinkedIn, grab my email, and prove me wrong. And that's the story. So how much I've got? I got 2 minutes for questions, and I'll go in and deal with them. How do you deliver metrics to measure the success of your transformation? The key thing in metrics is two things. You probably know more about how to measure than you think you do at any one given time. So you probably know how to measure, or somebody's already measured it. That's not the hard part. The hard part is in making sure you get believable metrics. Set a benchmark, get agreement on how to measure, and you'll be much more successful. And yes, you can get the slide deck, and I will deal with each one of those individual questions. I'll post them in the chat, answers in the chat as we go through. But I want to get on to our next presentation, and a really great one as well.